Hi, my name is Cameron Carr. You're listening to the Bearcast on Sikkim365.com.
Welcome into the Bearcast on Sikkim365.com, presented by WellMed Medical Management and Barefoot Campus Outfitter. Head over to Barefoot Campus Outfitter in Waco or go to the website and use Sikkim365 as your code to save 20% off your purchase. I'm your host, Grayson Grundhoefer, and today I'm here with Levi Caraway. We're going to break down all things that have to do with Baylor's new athletic director, Doug McNamee. He just had his introduction press conference today. It was a very interesting one. It was an interesting setup. They did a Q&A. They had a full-on press conference with he and Linda Livingstone. Went through a whole bunch of different things. So Levi and I are going to break down everything we heard, our initial takeaways, and just some of the things that I think he alluded to that could potentially be coming up for Baylor Athletics going forward and what he is going to prioritize. So Levi, this was a big day for Baylor and a big day for Baylor Athletics, big day for every sport, specifically football, which is kind of on the hot seat right now. As we all know, that's a hot topic, but I think, Levi, it was just a very interesting one and something that I think many people came away impressed with. What did you think about the day, and what did you think about this initial introduction?
Yeah, considering just kind of how outside the box kind of a hire he was, I guess, with the Magnolia and Field and Stream background, I don't think a lot of people knew what to expect coming in today, but I for sure came away super impressed just overall by his delivery, his attitude, his demeanor, just his visions for moving forward. Super positive guy, super genuine. I think that just kind of exudes off of him, and I think he's just such a breath of fresh air that this athletic department needed. And I think just him being the face of it moving forward is just really encouraging. And I thought everything he had to say was awesome. I think he touched on a lot of interesting topics like you mentioned. But yeah, I'm really excited for the future. What were your kind of main thoughts?
I came into this pretty excited because I talked to some people over the weekend and there were just rave reviews about him. And I didn't know much about him, like just being transparent. And so I think getting that feedback was pretty reassuring when you talk to people who have been around the program for a long time and are pretty close to him, kind of what he's about. I found that to be really cool. I think something that stood out to me that was cool, but it was even bigger than I thought it was going to be, was the fact that he is a Baylor alum. I actually think that that is a home run decision by Linda Livingstone in this case, because man, the way he talked about getting this job, the way he talked about it being he waited 20 something years for a job like this, basically, and just something that he's been building towards, the job that he wanted. He left 7 years ago, and this was his goal, to become the athletic director at Baylor. That's incredible. And for a guy to talk about this being, his lifetime job, like the job that he always wanted, that means something, man. And that's not something that you get just from kind of an outsider. And by Baylor not hiring an outsider, you really got a taste of how much this job means to him and how much this program means to him. That stood out to me and really kind of appealed to me far more than I thought that it would initially. But to hear him talk about, going to his parents' graveyard before the interview and then just saying that, that's all he needed. That's what he needed to go into this interview. He didn't have to prepare a whole bunch of stuff. He got that peace of mind from just being there with them and know, he was going to lay it all on the field for when he went and talked to Linda Livingstone. And so all of that really impressed me and was something that, again, initial thoughts, that stood out to me far more than I thought that it would.
Yeah, for sure. That was a really awesome part of it because you're so used to hearing about the Baylor bubble, and you're like, oh, did they kind of go with the safe hire because everybody knows him? But I don't think this necessarily was the safe hire because of how outside the box it was. And I found it very interesting too when Linda Livingstone said that he was the best candidate, and being a Baylor guy wasn't necessarily like the barometer for being hired. I thought that was cool. And then I found another thing too was when he talked about that, although he's been gone for the last 7 years, kind of and doing these other business ventures, that he paid close attention to college athletics because it was his passion. It wasn't that he just got placed right here in the middle of all this tumultuous NIL revenue share, all these types of things. Like he'd been paying attention extensively. And according to like what you guys what you have said, what Colt said, what Ashley said, all of y'all's sources and stuff, this, like, you would not want to bet against this guy. Very smart. Obviously, Scott Drew said he was his preferred candidate, so that means a lot too. So yeah, just I think all those things are super encouraging, and I think he's going to be a visionary. He kind of has that entrepreneur mindset, and he really is in touch with what the fan base wants and what the fan base needs. And so yeah, what were your kind of thoughts with his comments about the fan base in particular and wanting them to be seen and wanting to be heard?
Well, he mentioned his 3 priorities, which we'll get to, but one of those priorities had everything to do with the fans. And I think that is, again, something that an outsider might not relate to. He brought up the fact that he was a fan. He is a fan. He can relate to that. He went through the ups and downs of college athletics because when he was at Baylor, they weren't really good at anything. And then when he was a grad student, they were good at a lot of things. And so I think he can relate to that. I think everything he said about the fans, he was asked about it, but he brought up stuff about the fans before he was asked about it. I think that's a big thing. I think he clearly wants to connect with the fans. And listen, some fans aren't going to be happy, and I've already seen the reaction on Twitter and on our website. Some fans just aren't going to be happy until Dave Aranda's fired. It's almost as if they didn't read anything that I have published over the last, however long since Linda Livingstone gave her addressing the Dave Aranda situation. It's been very clear he is going to be the head coach for Baylor to start the 2026 season. That just is what it is. But some fans aren't going to be happy until that decision is made. That's fine. And if that's you, I'm not really talking to you. But
and that doesn't mean we agree to it either.
No, exactly. And so now, but from other fans' perspectives, from fans that are more open to just kind of listening and seeing, where does he want this program to go? What does he want to do? What are his main values and things that he wants to see happen? One of those is connecting to the fans. And he mentioned the fact that they owe the fans. They have to win for the fans. Like, it's not just you should show up and be happy about whatever's on the field. That is not what he said at all. He mentioned he wants this program to get to a point where, they're winning a lot, but even when they're not winning, the fan experience is really good and going to games is really fun and going to games is an event. I think all of that is such a big positive, and the fact that he handled it the way that he did before being asked about it is absolutely key. I think fans will resonate with that.
Yeah, 100%. Just him having the pulse of the program is just going to be so important for everybody involved, because I think like these last however many years, it just feels like the athletic department was just kind of like shrouded in secrecy, and it was just kind of its own thing and nothing ever got out, and the occasional leak was to ESPN or whatever. But having somebody that's just like accessible and out front, that's going to do wonders for connecting the fan base and just healing a lot of wounds. I think one of my favorite comments, might be my favorite comment from today, was he was like, I don't care if your name is on the sides of buildings at Baylor or if you're just a casual Waco person. Like, we want you at the stadium. We want you to have a good time. And I think that just kind of goes to show with just his mindset, because I think especially with the Waco community, just the people who haven't even graduated from Baylor, there's been such a big disconnect there. And Baylor needs all the help it can get in 2025. Like, those people they want to be T-shirt fans of Texas and A&M, but like, you're in Waco, like, let them support Baylor, pay them attention. And yeah, I think he's going to be incredible in that department.
Absolutely. Okay. So I think, Levi, one of the other priorities he talked about, which I think we need to address, is he mentioned his first priority is football right now and the transfer portal that's coming up to start January, literally January 2nd. The portal will open up. Guys will go in. Those announcements are already happening, but guys will officially go into the transfer portal on January 2nd. Baylor will be trying to get a transfer portal class that is pretty much unlike any class they've ever gotten. And Doug appears to be very much on board with this idea of, we need to pump in all the resources possible and get in all the manpower possible to make that happen, to make this a successful transfer portal. I found that to be rather interesting. Now, just a little context on this. He did say he's spoken to Dave Aranda 5 times in 36 hours. They've talked a ton. He mentioned that they both agree that more enjoyable moments are needed, that it hasn't been good enough up to this point, that they need to get back to that. They need to have more moments for the program, for the student athletes, and for the fans. He also said, I'm here to do whatever it takes to help him. And he believes that the two of them will work well together. I think it's important to note that you can also read between the lines here a little bit and just kind of understand that he has to say these things. He has to go in this direction. He has to support his coach because he's got to give him every shot possible to try to win next year, because everyone wants to win. Everyone wants this to be a successful program. But if it doesn't work for Dave Aranda, I do think that for the next coach, it is very good to have proof of concept of what you can do in the transfer portal and how much NIL money you can actually gather to make an impact on the transfer portal. So either way, I felt like this was a good answer. I know people, again, some people are not going to be happy with this, but I can tell you right now, the decision to keep Dave Aranda was already made and it wasn't his decision. So now it's just about how do you make the best out of a tough situation, a situation that you're going to have to live with, but a situation that you're hoping gets rectified and just gets better, honestly.
Yeah, I know I'm sure there's a good contingent of people who just wanted him to go up there and trash Aranda, but obviously you can't do that. And so, I mean, we saw what Tech did last year, completely just buying a defensive line in the portal. So if there's obviously Baylor's going to have a lot more money freed up with all the seniors gone. So who knows what's going to happen. But yeah, you kind of have to give Aranda everything he needs this offseason, see where it goes. But you definitely could kind of read between the lines. It's like I found this quote very interesting. He said, quote for quote, "We know the current state is unacceptable, and we've got to keep driving that bus forward, and we will." And so there you go. I mean, he says it. Like, he's not okay with what they're doing. And they talked about extensively today how athletics is the front porch for the university, and they're not going to accept a mediocre football program moving forward. I mean, obviously, this year is kind of difficult with everything that transpired with Mac Rhodes, but like, McNamee's not going to allow them to keep going 5-7 and not making bowl games, especially with all the money going into the program.
Right. And I think just kind of transitioning that as well, they also talked about the bowl game stuff. And so Linda had an interesting quote that kind of is in line with what you just talked about, how it's unacceptable, for them. And I mean, she was like, the results on the field, like, we didn't earn a bowl game. Like, this was not a good enough team for a bowl game. She mentioned that. She also mentioned that the costs were going to be higher to go to the bowl game than to not go, which I'm sure played a little bit of a factor. But the biggest factor was better use of time and resources for the portal. I mean, they are all in on the portal. Now, I think they need to figure out what they're going to do with the staff, because that situation still is not clarified. There's a lot of open positions. There's a lot of cloudy situations right now. It was just announced that Matthew Pallage is leaving. So there's just a lot of holes that need to be filled. But in general, a big focus and a big statement by both Linda Livingstone and Doug McNamee is that they need to focus on the portal. And that took precedence over going to a bowl game, which honestly it should. I know a lot of people were upset about it, but like, this team didn't need to go to a bowl game. A lot of these guys weren't going to play. And then the guys that were going to play, you don't necessarily want them to go out there and have these massive games and then get poached by other teams. So there's a lot of these kind of things that are going on, especially if you're not going to make any money off of it.
And logistically speaking, can you just kind of talk about how, like, explain how the exit meetings have happened, like all the logistics behind it, of how this would have been really hard to accomplish on such a short notice?
Really difficult. I mean, because literally within the last, 5 days, they've started having more and more, less than 5 days, 3 days, they've had a lot of meetings with players. So you're letting players know where they're at as far as their situation at Baylor. They're obviously having a lot of meetings amongst the coaching staff, as Dave Aranda has mentioned, as we've mentioned on the premium side of things, just talking about where things are at, trying to, some guys are looking for other jobs. We've seen that already. And then Baylor is obviously, Dave Aranda is trying to move on from situations. So all of these things have been happening literally since signing day ended, which was on December 3rd. And we're talking 5 days. They've had to do all of that. That's a lot. And also you have to remember that there's ramifications from those conversations. Like, Guys may not want to play. You're obviously the NFL guys probably wouldn't have played in this game. The guys who are, trying to go to the NFL draft, the players who aren't going to be back next year probably weren't going to play in this game. Like, just so much uncertainty with the players, with the staff, with the athletic department. I mean, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go play in a bowl game. And I think everyone's pretty much mentioned that at this point.
Yeah, and so let's backtrack a minute. What's that third thing that you wanted to talk about as well?
Yeah, the third thing that he mentioned, and this was something that on the premium side, we talked about what we wanted to see kind of in a new athletic director. And one thing that I mentioned, I'm not sure if everyone mentioned this or not, but organizationally, I think they needed to change a lot. And they really need to get new positions, dissolve positions. They just need a reshuffling to focus their priorities on other things. And the thing that he mentioned specifically was revenue. Like, their athletic department needs to be geared towards revenue. And whether that's alumni relations, whether that's big donors, going and talking to big donors, whether it's, the fans, your external resources, Waco, all of these things need to be focused on. And it was pretty clear that there's going to be a bit of an organizational shift towards revenue, gaining revenue. I think that's pretty notable given the fact that everything we've talked about with him really does center around business. Like that's what this centers around. And so for him to prioritize revenue makes a lot of sense as a business guy, as someone that we've talked about who's going to care a whole lot about the numbers. And at the end of the day right now, numbers matter a whole lot. Like if you have the NIL numbers, they can change everything for you. I mean, look at Tech. I mean, that is typically a 5 to 8 win program every single year. And now they're having an outlier season just because they have more resources than everyone else in the Big 12 for this year.
Yeah, and we'd reported on too that how Mac Rhodes had kind of alienated some of the donors within Baylor's alumni base and whatnot. And so I think I was so happy to hear Linda and Doug both talk about how like they have great relationships with the donors. The donors were super on board and excited with Doug's hiring because he spent time back when he was in Baylor's athletic department during the Bryles years. He was working with the Bear Foundation, so he knows a lot of those big money people. So I think that's going to be a huge key to getting everybody on board and moving in the same direction money wise.
Yeah, it will be. Speaking of what he maybe doesn't know about, because obviously the business side and the revenue side, he knows a lot about, but I really enjoyed his answer on, he was just being very transparent when he was asked about, not having a job like this, not really being involved in athletics for a while, which I know is a huge concern amongst many Baylor fans, but he mentioned the word humility multiple times in his response to that, said it's his first time in this chair, was very honest and transparent about the fact that he's got to learn some stuff. And I found that to be not something that many ADs would say. And I don't think that's something that Mac Rhodes would have ever said. Learning, right? Humility about certain things. And I think, he mentioned connecting and learning from other ADs across the Big 12. He looks at the coaches at Baylor as CEOs. And so walking alongside them while giving them the resources to effectively do their job was something that he definitely mentioned, but it was also something that he said he's got to learn. He's got to learn this process and he's eager to learn. But again, I think addressing it and talking about it instead of just saying, oh yeah, this is going to be easy. I know exactly what I'm doing. This is not going to be a problem for me. I don't think that really goes over too well. But I think doing it the way that he did and saying that there's room for him to grow and there's things that he needs to learn and there's things that he is going to learn, I think really, really gave me a lot of insight into kind of who he is as a person and also kind of what his goals are and what his timeline kind of is for becoming the athletic director that Baylor needs at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. The most intelligent people are always looking to learn, always asking questions. And that's what I was kind of hitting on earlier. You could just tell how genuine he was when he says stuff like that. And that makes people want to teach him or, help him and work with him and whatnot. And it reminds me a lot of when Brett Yormark was first hired as the Big 12 commissioner 3 or 4 years ago, kind of a completely out of the box hire, but it was what the Big 12 needed. Like they were just so like old and politicky with with Bowlesby, and they just needed something fresh. And I think Yormark provided that, and Yormark has done a really good job just doing outside the box stuff with revenue and whatnot. And I think Doug can do a very similar thing. But we also have to talk about too how like a lot of programs are hiring these outside the box guys now. Like Linda talked about it too, how OU is spreading a wide net for their new AD. Notre Dame, UNC, and a few other schools she mentioned have all hired kind of guys that are from entertainment or music or for professional sports or whatnot. So this is going to be the new thing moving forward, is hiring these athletic directors who are not necessarily like lifetime athletic department guys, but people who have different types of experience who can help in this setting with all the revenue and money and NIL and whatnot.
It's just a completely different job than
Mm-hmm.
it used to be. It really is. And the things that you have to be good at are completely different. And so, yeah, that is an intriguing part of it. And it's a risk. Don't hear
Yeah,
what we're not
absolutely.
saying. It's a risk, but it's also probably the right risk, I think, for Baylor. Baylor needs to change a lot of things, get better about a lot of things. And I also think just, focus on certain things that maybe Baylor can be good at. So let's talk about a few of those, Levi, before we, head out of here. He mentioned the advantages that Baylor has. And I think we knew a few of these, but I also think it's important that he specifically mentioned a couple of these. So first one's facilities. Baylor did a facility update before NIL started. Spent a lot of money on those facilities, but it's going to give them an advantage from a just looking across the landscape of college football. A lot of programs aren't going to put an emphasis on that anymore. So Baylor's facilities should be very, very close to the top. Kind of up against anyone. I think that's one of the things he mentioned. He mentioned the location. Very ideal for recruiting, very ideal for fans, for revenue, for people to come to the games, all of those things. He mentioned that. He mentioned the university's commitment to sports. He said sports need to deliver for the university, but he likes the commitment that the university has and the leadership that has a focus on sports. And then finally, and the one that I think he's going to hit on a lot during his time as the athletic director is the faith-based mission of Baylor University. He called Baylor one of one in their faith component. It's Baylor's biggest competitive advantage. That's what he said about just Baylor's faith-based mission. And I think he mentioned the mission statement a lot. And I think that that's going to be something he's going to emphasize. And we all know that that's a big advantage for Baylor. But I really do think that Doug is going to really lean into that, maybe more so than Mac did or previous ADs have. And we'll see if that works out. But I do think it is something that Baylor has to utilize a lot because it literally is rooted in the university's core.
Yeah, absolutely. And he talked about how his faith had led him to this point. And he even talked about how, like, when he visited his parents at the cemetery, he essentially prayed like, God, this is in your hands. Like, I can't control it. And he ends up getting the job. So that's awesome. And he's right. Yeah, it is a one-of-one type thing. And you hear about all these different athletes who, when they leave Baylor, they're like, this is the best choice I ever made. I'm so happy that I did that. And you see Sawyer Robertson baptizing all the guys in the swimming pools and the football program and all that type of stuff is just so awesome. And I think he's going to really lead the charge of Baylor leaning into that. And for the most part, I don't think we've seen like Baylor really have a lot of mass exodus in terms of transfers because for the most part, everybody really loves being there.
They do. I think that's going to change a little bit this offseason. I think there's going to be a few more guys that enter. I think there's going to be a little bit of a shift in that area, but you are correct. The guys that Baylor wants to keep at Baylor certainly typically stay at Baylor. At least it has been the case for Dave Aranda. But when you go 5-7, there are obviously changes that need to be made there. And they're certainly working on it. This was a 2.5-week process, according to Linda Livingstone. This was one that they went and looked at people who are current Power 4 athletic directors. They looked at group of 5 athletic directors or group of 6 athletic directors. They looked at different business people as well. And Doug stood out to them, specifically the business side of this. And you mentioned it. Him being a Baylor alum was just a little bit of a push in his favor, but it wasn't the decision factor. It wasn't something that made Linda make the decision. But I do think, again, it was just a nice bonus. And so she mentioned the process, 2.5 weeks, a little longer than I think I expected. But at the end of the day, I feel very good about the guy that Baylor got. And I came away really impressed with Doug McNamee. And I think this is a guy who won his initial press conference. And you can't always say that. It's kind of hard to have definitive statements like that. But I think he absolutely did. And everything I've heard about him, everything I just saw that he put together today has been very impressive. And I'm really excited to see kind of what he does over these next few days and how much he shifts Baylor's NIL landscape here coming up in a month. I mean, they got to go all hands on deck for the transfer portal. And we're going to find out pretty quick, how much his contacts, his relationships, his donor relations. We're going to find out a whole lot about that really here in the coming month.
Yeah, 100%. And something that kind of Mac Rose struggled with was he never really wanted to be the front-facing person for the athletic department, for the program and whatnot. And so it'll be really interesting to see in these next couple weeks how much Doug gets out there and puts himself out there. And obviously we know he's accessible and he appears to be very transparent, but that's going to be something interesting to monitor because I think that's how you cultivate a family-like environment with the fan base and with the media and whatnot is just putting yourself out there and being open.
It absolutely does. So that will do it for today. We'll be back with more episodes of the Bearcast probably sometime this week. Hopefully get Colt Barber on to give his thoughts about the new athletic director. But for today, this has been the Bearcast on SicEm365.com.